Don't miss the awesome Naruto stories my sister creates. Her last channel was hacked, so to stay in the loop, please subscribe to her new channel. It would mean a lot to her, and you won't regret it. Hello to all lovers of lemon scenes. I invite you all to my boosty so you can watch your favorite Naruto What If stories in complete comfort. A subscription to Naruto Lemon, the first video with a full lemon, is already on my boosty channel. Dare! I always thought about his wedding with tenderness and irony, contrasting one to the other as impossible. I am his bride, only this fact remained the same, and 2 arrows departed from it. He loves, he does not love. Under the first I wrote, happiness, under the second I wrote, I will accept it. In 4 years of my life, I never once thought that I would be wrong at the beginning of the reaction, although it was stupid to reap the products of a seemingly successful experiment in advance. At his wedding, I quietly cried at my table in the east wing of the salon and could not stop this unfortunate physiological process, no matter how deeply I tried to breathe, no matter how hard I bit my lips, no matter what I thought. Sometimes I calmed down, but then the bride ran up to me, then suigetsu with champagne and a new passion, and again, like the tongue of a bell, a feeling was beating inside me, which could not be torn off, which screamed with its meticulous ringing that it was there, and I asserted that he was not there, and moaned along with the answer. It was a wretched, insignificant, incomprehensible self-pity characteristic only of weak people. Karin. Sakura ran up to me for the first time and, no matter how focused she was the entire time we met, being a bride, she grabbed my hand and, against my will, dragged me towards the dance floor. I'll throw a bouquet now. Come on quickly, everyone is gathered. I didn't push away from her, but I walked at a slower pace and rubbed my eyes with my free hand to keep them dry. So I tripped and hit one of the waiters, who, fortunately, was dexterous enough to hold 3 glasses of champagne on the tray. Sakura laughed and continued to walk quickly, pulling me with her under the main spotlight. As a result, I got a bouquet of beautiful red and white, pleasant-smelling, but sweet little roses. Sakura threw him under the high ceiling of the salon, and he, arching, fell straight into my hands, which were spread out to meet him. And like a wealthy little mouse, I hugged him and carried him to my hole, to the east wing, where it was dark and cozy. Approaching me a second time, Sakura began with a request to take a photo, but then again she firmly grabbed my palm and, deciding that she was a bride today and did what she wanted, she led me to a wide wicker arch, under which the newlyweds' table stood and next to which the whole evening the photographer was rubbing himself with a heavy camera. Now Sasuke and a loud and lively blonde man unknown to me were still standing next to her. I couldn't stop the tears. Realizing that I didn't like Sasuke, that I was sincerely happy for him and Sakura, I roared, looking at him. I bit my lips to stop, I hid my eyes behind my free hand and rubbed them along with my face. I told myself a lot that I wished the guy's happiness and I don't have the right to spoil the wedding. And a new uncontrollable hysteria was cutting my throat, and this knife didn't care what prayers I offered to heaven. Hey, Sakura, is this your friend? Asked a loud and lively blonde standing on Sasuke's right hand and quickly introduced himself. Uzumaki Naruto, nice to meet you. I couldn't help but answer. Something in him made me relax and not be afraid of my red eyes and trembling, bitten lips. Karin, the voice broke, sounded hoarse and uncertain and betrayed me completely, and I was prepared to hear a polite, indifferent and unnecessary question. Are you a bridesmaid? Naruto asked sarcastically, smiling conspiratorially, as if he had not heard the intonation with which my answer sounded. And I was supposed to stand on the right hand of the groom in the church, but I was late. Now I'm trying to justify myself, but they walk around pouting. Sakura, seeing Naruto, let go of my hand and, running up to him, lightly, faintly hit him in the stomach, as if venting her anger. Then she hugged him. Consider that you are justified, she said loudly, laughing, in his ear. Oh, we need to call Ino. and ran away again, rustling her dress. When she left, I took a few steps to the side and turned away from the light, feigning interest in the dance floor and the music on my face. It became easier to breathe and I didn't have to explain to myself what was happening in order to calm down. Just look at the joyful guests and at the same time not notice them, immersed in your own distant and mythical thoughts. Then even time was on my side, now it imperceptibly and quickly turned into memories. Sakura's friend Ino came up and the bride placed all our bodies under the guidance of the puppeteer of the art of chemistry and technology. The bride and groom are in the center, friends and girlfriends on the sides. Quickly, before the newlyweds get tired of family life. Like a composition of fruits, the photographer arranged us and at the same time tried to joke with us as with people. The man was so cheerful that even I relaxed my lips and smiled, not because he said something funny, but because he said something funny. I stood to the right of Sakura and stepped back half a step on the orders of the puppeteer in order to emphasize the photo card on the main thing, because throughout the evening the newlyweds took only 4 photos together. Also standing to my right was Ino. Naruto was placed symmetrically next to Sasuke and told me to put the bottle of champagne at least behind the groom's back. He disobeyed and was forgiven. When the photographer hid his face behind the fabric of the camera, Naruto took a step forward, catching up with the guys, and in a friendly manner pushed Sasuke with his right hand and laughed. The puppeteer, resigning himself to the childish prank, shouted to us to get ready for a bad card and smile. I finally looked into the lens, but quickly averted my eyes to the side. My gaze automatically slid along Sakura's back and noticed the Uchiha's hand placed on her waist. Someone else's sincere laughter reached my ears through the loud music. It was hard for me not to cry. I realized that if I didn't calm down, I would make things worse for everyone. Sighed and exhaled, pushed thoughts about everything away and barely audibly began humming some unfamiliar melody. Flash. Karin, Ino, I'll give you the photos in a couple of days. Sakura shouted and disappeared with Sasuke into the crowd of raging young guests on the dance floor. I was left alone at the crossroads of the lens and drunken and cheerful people wanting to be photographed. Ino ran off to dance with her boyfriend, and Naruto left so quickly that I didn't notice where. Alone, I quickly calmed down and decided to return to my hole. But something did not allow me to take a step towards the dark and calm part of the salon. Annoyed with myself, I wanted to drink, despairing of finding no other entertainment. The people around were vaguely familiar to me, and I only met someone like Naruto today. I had no one to spend the evening with. I grinned at the thought that my only friend was a bottle of ethyl alcohol impurities, and went into the small but quiet room of the bar. On the other hand, I really wanted whiskey. A few drops of invigorating, burning whiskey to make my head spin. I have never tolerated alcohol, so that tomorrow I won't remember anything. No tears, no photographs, no his hand on her waist, no ringing laughter of all the guests. To open your eyes tomorrow and bang, like fireworks, a new life will bloom before my eyes, my new life. This means that I was extremely selective in my friends. Approaching the bar counter, I laughed at the hopelessness of my life. Pure whiskey, please. I shouted confidently and leaned my elbows on the tabletop. My eyes dried up, my voice became stronger, and I could speak loudly, without fear of ruining anything, and laugh no less loudly, wanting to ruin everything in myself. Karin? Eh? I responded in surprise, turned around and again came face to face with Naruto, faded and quiet, and could not resist making an ironic joke. I thought that people like you drink nothing but champagne. He smiled in such a way that it became clear how many memories of high percentage alcohol were hidden behind his welcoming open mouth and raised corners of his lips. I, not knowing how to guess people's moods, adopted his momentary enthusiasm. So you're a bridesmaid? Naruto asked again, and I remembered that I had not yet answered this question when we were standing near the photographer's camera. He sat down next to me, to my right. This is my current status. I reported. I'm sorry I didn't answer then, somehow it didn't work out. Come on, I understand you. So you understand? I asked, puzzled, although I myself was aware of the obviousness of all my faces today, the fluctuations in my voice, the stupidity of excuses, the tightness, the uncertainty of movements. I spent the whole evening, without setting this as a goal, betraying my helplessness, and now I asked what the stranger sitting to my right could understand about me, what he could share with me. Really, having met once, he guessed me? And then I thought it was just a stock phrase. Only this was already an excuse, the intonation was wrong, the meaning was simple. I cried again from self-pity and someone else's sympathy, and began to cover my face with my palms, pretending to wipe the sweat from alcohol from my forehead and cheeks. I said that I understand. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it tightly in a friendly way. And do you know what unites us? I felt that he was smiling. We're both happy for them. I laughed ironically and annoyingly, without removing my hands from my face and continuing to roar. I couldn't look at him. Raising my head now, saying something, was a step towards shooting my own life, all my former decisions, and myself. No need. You understand that this will not make it any easier for anyone. Especially for them. Naruto sighed heavily and removed his hand, but with our behavior we are doing the opposite. Silently I asked him to shut up, but I could not say anything out loud, not finding the strength to make my voice sound. He only whispered. Naruto's words, caring and sympathetic, could not calm me down. They seemed to beat me, shook my exhausted body, and I continued to quietly, silently roar, barely holding back and not breaking down. And then Naruto stood up noisily from his chair and hugged me. He hugged an unfamiliar, hysterical, out-of-control woman like an old friend. As if nauseated, tears rolled up to my throat. I roared again, with frenzy, not afraid of the fear and contempt of the people in the bar, not embarrassed by their incomprehensible expressions on their faces. I roared into someone's shirt, and some part of me was free for the first time. For the first time I breathed deeply and often, and for the only time in my life I screamed, like waves thrown by the wind onto the shore, which in pleasure then returned back in a thin cover of calm water. My storm was short-lived, it quickly subsided. The air, which had been ferocious inside for so long independently of me, froze into a stuffy mass of gases. Now calm down, Naruto said quietly, and at that moment I clearly understood that he was in pain too. And not only because of the wedding, because of me. Do I remind you of yourself? I asked. No. Maybe yes. I don't know. His answer sounded in fragments. He thought over every part of it, and when it seemed that the main thing had to be said, he fell silent and, releasing me, sat down again on my right hand. Then hope began to flutter inside me. Unable to let anything new into me, I allowed it to be born, small, joyfully flickering along my hand, which I placed on Naruto's shoulder. Maybe you can tell me something interesting? This is not the day to sit and drown your grief in alcohol. I was probably beaming. Because of his smile, I had just such an image of myself, a lively, unclouded girl who could probably save. He talked about many things, but not about her. Yes, it wasn't particularly interesting. I just wanted to laugh, keep up the conversation, smile maliciously. And we succeeded. Until the end of the evening we discussed everything, except for the two lucky ones who had long since escaped from the annoying guests. We were happy too, but we were missing something. Love? The separation was inevitable, not difficult, but inevitable. But we promised to meet this week. This made the fragile hope in my hands tremble more. It swarmed like a fire all over my palm. Jumped up and screamed something quietly. It seems he managed to hear. He smiled and left. See you later. Bye. We didn't meet, he didn't even call. For the first time in 3 months, I learned about him from Sakura in a random conversation on the phone when I made the wrong number and dialed her. Naruto and his girlfriend went to Hawaii after our wedding. They won't arrive soon. The Uchiha colorfully described their relationship. using admiring epithets and unnecessary interjections through the word. And I listened indifferently, remembering the long-lost hope and the unwavering heart, which was now hardened. And the only thing I could do was look out the window at the faded city and deserted streets, at loneliness in all its glory. At least he conveyed everything I felt, calm. By the way, Karin, can I meet you? I want to tell you something. Sakura suddenly raised her voice. Come on, I said, unable to hold back a yawn, and mumbled sweetly into the phone. Where? You are probably tired from your work. It's okay, everything will get better soon. Let's go to a restaurant near your house then. I don't remember the name. Carousel of Desire? Yes. Tomorrow at 5, is that okay? Of course, I have a day off tomorrow. After saying goodbye, we ended the conversation. The telephone receiver remained in my hand. I could no longer get up, put it down and slip back into bed, being lazy and throwing off all the blame on myself for the exhausting work. Sakura was right, she's terrible. Rare days off on Sunday, hard days in the laboratory, stupid colleagues and annoying suckers who invest money in us and want quick results. But what irritated me most was coming home at 10 in the evening and going to work at 6 in the morning. I'm on my feet all the time and always want to sleep. Without the right to refuse the position, I have too much responsibility. I reassure myself with only one thing: everything will calm down soon. A year or two. This time is so unpredictable, you just have to run quickly. Outraged and tormented, I fell asleep heavily and, having slept for more than a dozen hours, I was almost late for the meeting with the Uchiha. It's good that you liked this restaurant, Sakura. At least I don't have to trudge through the whole city. I grumbled, putting on one sneaker and looking for the second with my eyes. He found himself near the bedside table, by the door. I hastily grabbed my umbrella and bag, picked up my sneakers with my toes and skipped out of the apartment, locked it all and got to the elevator. While he was coming down, I quickly put on my shoes and sighed calmly. But I got some sleep. I got to the Carousel of Desire without incident, although I galloped at all the red lights and rushed along the meter-wide sidewalk, like a mad horse that someone had given a good start. I entered a diner-type restaurant and took a table opposite the door so that Sakura would find me without delay and would not subsequently get lost in the maze of crooked mirrors presented in Carousel as entertainment and a partition between tables. When the waiter arrived, I ordered some delicious-looking cakes. Relaxing her head on the back of a high chair, she began to look at the ceiling made of huge pieces of mosaic. Together the puzzles did not form any picture, meaninglessly scattered puzzle pieces. But this attempt at pop art was no worse than in the exhibition halls of Boston. The waiter returned, placed the ordered cakes on the table and left. Looking askance at the food and deciding to wait for Sakura, I can't eat so much alone in my life. I closed my eyes and began sniffing the various smells of a city Sunday morning, raw, but the cold air from the street and the poisonous perfume of a woman sitting 3 meters from me, the cakes and coffee of the eatery, tobacco. All this heavy pile of aromas, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes good, but too rich, would probably drive sophisticated people crazy, but it touched me. There are so many different people around. Unnoticed, I was visited by a light, superficial sleep without pictures or thoughts, which lasted only 5 seconds. Sorry I'm late. Hearing Sakura's voice, I shuddered and suddenly opened my eyes. She stood in front of me and smiled in a dress of a delicate color with a long and fluffy light skirt and a strangely wide top that made her look fuller. Shall I sit down? Of course, sit down, I pointed to the plate, will you? No, her smile became wider. Don't want. So what did you want to say? I took one cake and brought it to my mouth, deciding not to pretend to be well-mannered and mentally preparing to eat 5 more of the same creations of confectionery art. Honestly, I thought for a long time about what she wanted to tell me about, but due to lack of sleep, nothing worthwhile came into my head, either their divorce, then his promotion, or pregnancy, the idea of which seemed illusory to me, because only 3 months had passed since their weddings. I also randomly thought about Naruto, as if Sakura wanted to tell me about him and, about me. At this moment I was always angry with myself, but I couldn't get rid of the dissolute thought from my head, I'm pregnant. I was sincerely surprised by her statement, because, as a result of all the conclusions, her pregnancy seemed impossible to me. I slowly and carefully put the cake on the plate, doubting for about 2 minutes what to do, scream hysterically, like a woman, or calmly congratulate. I was really happy for them. Congratulations. I suddenly jumped out of my seat, hugged her and, it seems, shed tears. How long? What do you want to call it? I rushed in with questions, sat down and began to gobble up cakes on both cheeks, looking into Sakura's eyes and not looking away from mine for a second. Duration, 3 months. Sasuke's parents insisted that the name be Japanese, so if the girl is Yasuko, the boy is Itachi, in honor of Sasuke's brother. He died a month before the wedding. For me, brother Sasuke has always been a ghost. I kind of knew that he existed, that he was a good person, but I never knew him personally. According to Suigetsu's stories, he was a very smart person, even wise. I often wanted to meet him, and it's a pity that it's too late. Even now it is a pity that he died 22 years ago. Let's not talk about this, I said quietly. When should I give birth? At the end of August or beginning of September. I forgot to order coffee. What are you going to do? I didn't come to my senses in time. When Yasuko was born, our military research corps learned of the declaration of war and Germany's attack on Poland. The rumors that were creeping around the desks of the bosses in the form of reports from spy infiltrators about the coalition of Germans and Japan were finally used as a reliable and irrefutable fact and as an assumption about the impending danger to the country, which our government could not allow. That day they called me to work and didn't let me go until the night. They didn't trust me, and the reason for this was my 1/8 Japanese blood. I am an American to the core. I don't even know anything good about Japan. I rebelled when the questions began to be repeated with intonation, as if one person was talking to another who was stupid and insignificant in his eyes. After all, I work for America. But your grandfather was Japanese. Yes, but I swam across the ocean to get here. And my father fought for our lives now in the World War. My comprehensive answers did not reach the muscle-brained thug, who was not created for negotiations, but trained for interrogations. Then, realizing the huge difference between these words, I realized what kind of pig I had to work for, and I began to rage only so that they would quickly let me out, at least considering me insane. What is the search for truth when the argument is led by a fool? You passed the test, congratulations, that soldier retorted, smiling stupidly, but I understood that this phrase was routine and that it was not the end of all my quarrels with my superiors. Long live the hard-working months, I thought, not knowing what was really waiting for me. I returned home at 4 in the morning and had 47 minutes of sleep left, which were mercilessly stolen. Entering the apartment, I immediately noticed polished men's shoes near the mirror and a neatly hung coat, and then I heard the Uchiha's voice from the kitchen. We have a girl, he said. I'll definitely teach her how to braid your hair if you don't cut your hair. Did Sakura give you the key? Leaning on the bedside table, I reluctantly began to take off my dress shoes, which brought terrible discomfort. Then my attitude towards Sasuke had already grown into a reproachful friendship, when a girl's love for an old friend was revealed and, most importantly, experienced. Yes, she asked me to tell you about it. Now I'm going to the hospital again. By the way, do you eat ramen? A friend taught me how to cook it, it turns out it's so simple. I went into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Sasuke placed a plate in front of me and began to wash the dishes. Why so long? He asked. Did you hear that the war has begun? America suspects, or rather wants to suspect, that Japan sided with Germany, and the authorities somehow became aware of my roots. So they arranged an interrogation. I was more interested in food than in what I was saying, picking with a fork in the depths of the soup ocean. In appearance, the first Sasuke's cooking I ate looked dubious, albeit elegant, like in good restaurants. But its vomit yellow color alone gave rise to unpleasant thoughts. I don't know how the whole plate ended up in me, and I almost asked the Uchiha for the recipe. It's normal with your job. They have the right to doubt, the Uchiha noted, continuing to rub the frying pan. And now I'll be removed from the project. Suddenly my voice trembled, although I didn't think that parting with the project would make me unhappy. The order of the authorities is the law. I somehow feel violent about his laws. I flared up. I'm afraid of what the war will lead us to. I feel that it will not last a week or a month. And not a year. It can hurt us too. Are you scared? Not a bit. I have the power to protect my family. I have nothing more to fear. Lucky, I said, now realizing that I had no one to protect and no one to be protected by. I never thought that everything would turn out this way. Too unpredictable. This is life, it's always like this. You could feel from his intonations that he was smiling. Should I give you a ride to work? It is good to. I'll just wash my face. Sasuke was right about the ever unpredictable life. When we were driving to the building, I, mocking myself, recalled my old dreams, to sit with the Uchiha in the same car and hug him, waiting for every red one, and kiss him. And that early morning he simply gave me a ride to work and talked about the newborn Yasuko, how much she weighs, whose eyes she inherited, is she healthy? A couple of years ago I would have laughed and joked at the person who predicted such a future for me, but now I understand that this is exactly the kind of relationship I dreamed of, simple, relaxed. And that's why life is unpredictable. I've been different for 6 months now. Keep the key and the pass to the hospital for Sakura and Yasuko, just in case. Taking the handed things, I got out of the car. Everything will be fine, the Uchiha said goodbye. Surprisingly, I was removed from the project and at 7 o'clock in the evening they told me that the working day was over. The demotion, our bureaucrat boss persistently called it a horizontal movement in a social elevator, made us neither cold nor warm, neither joy nor disappointment, but a simple fact in the brain. Having caught a taxi, I went to see Sakura at the hospital to catch up on what I had missed over the past 2 days, to find out about her well-being, about Yasuko, and whether it was true that the baby had the same green eyes as her mother. Moreover, an hour earlier, a restless Sasuke called to work and asked me to sit with my girls. Between words, he said something about a friend who would arrive at 12 o'clock and replace me, but I didn't wait for him, because I myself wanted to sit with Sakura, and a stranger would only interfere with our conversation like women. The hospital was already empty and quiet. Visiting hours had long ended and only occasionally were medical workers scurrying along the corridors. One guard, with his annoying but lively grumbling, replaced hundreds of people anxiously scurrying around the floors. He didn't like my pass and the time I arrived. He considered this disrespect for the work of others and a lack of understanding of the normal biological needs of people. Everyone is already asleep, he shouted after me. But he was wrong about Sakura. After she recovered from giving birth, she couldn't sleep. The young mother needed somewhere to put her energy. And so, when my flushed face appeared at the door, she jumped out of bed and hugged me tightly. "Hello. I'm so glad to see you," she exclaimed when I stepped over the threshold and closed the door. "How are you here?" Sakura sat me down on the sofa and began to tell me about everything that had happened over these 2 days, about the kind nurses, about Yasuko, who was sleeping very close, through the wall, although at that moment it was impossible to look at her, about Sasuke and his caring parents who sat with her all morning. Although her face had turned pale, losing its pink blush, and there were fat bruises under her eyes, you could tell from Sakura's behavior that she was happy. By chance she started talking about a person I didn't want to hear anything about. But I couldn't interrupt her. After all, what she wanted was to be listened to. Naruto called me. He promised to visit me. I haven't seen him for so long. After all, he now works for the army and broke up with Tenten. Unexpectedly, my brain turned upside down for 2 days. I remembered about the interrogation, about the demotion, and suddenly came to understand Uzumaki. He probably got it from his superiors too. Why is that? When Sakura spoke, I realized how wrong I had been to control my tongue. After all, what I had to explain later was unnecessary for her, a Japanese woman. But what can I say otherwise? Cynicism overwhelmed me. I thought that it should be straightforward, without descriptions. Sorry, Sakura, but we've started a war, or, yes, the authorities here have been interrogating me all day because of my origin. Yes, they're driving out the whole army, I began confidently, but paused too long, coming up with a reason, because of fire safety rules. Yesterday the warehouse almost burned down. Are you talking about the war? I looked at her blankly, not knowing how to answer or what to do. The body froze, not receiving commands from the brain, and the face lost any expression. I imagined what could be read in my eyes. What? War? Where? Why war? And I was thinking what else to tell her and what a creature this Uchiha is. War. What is war? My gaze asked. Is this what father talked so much about? I felt all the simplicity in my appearance. War? But yesterday, indeed, an ammunition depot almost burned down. But about the war? I don't know anything. Sasuke told you this? So as not to answer directly, I asked. Yes. He said not to worry, the war is only in Europe. The last war in Europe turned into a world war, I muttered out of an old habit of denying everything and out of stupidity. It's just that now there's a rumor that Japan is siding with Germany. It won't be any easier for us now. I hope you, as a mother, have a feeling that all this will pass us by. Yes, and I know that everything will be fine. That's what we'll believe. I smiled weakly, and she smiled back. We didn't talk anymore, we were tired and lost in thought. Half an hour later, or earlier, Sakura fell asleep. I only noticed this when her head lay on my shoulder. She looked so calm and serene that she involuntarily made me jealous. Then, completely exhausted, I fell asleep. The sleep was deep, but restless, heavy, and short-lived. I forgot where I was, and I barely managed to open my eyes. But the thick fog of confusion after sleep quickly dissipated, and I remembered that I was sleeping with Sakura in the hospital, and realized that I had already climbed onto the sofa with my legs when I fell asleep sitting up. Then I heard someone talking and began to distinguish voices. The first was an Uchiha, and the second was too rude to belong to an American. He was unrecognizable and faceless to me. I think to myself I called this voice, with a German accent. I sat down and, when the remnants of sleep no longer interfered with my thinking, I realized how wrong I was in jumping to a hasty conclusion. Sakura's guest was familiar to me. Sakura was sitting on the bed facing me and noticed my awakening. "Oh, Karin, you're awake. Look who's arrived." Amused, she spoke loudly. "Hello," Uzumaki Naruto said guiltily and childishly, as if it was only because of him that I woke up. He narrowed his eyes, smiling not only with his lips, but also with his eyes, with a tired but sincerely joyful look. I couldn't look at him any longer. "Hello and, most likely, goodbye," I said quickly and seriously, feigning boundless preoccupation with some important but non-existent matter and indifference to the Uzumaki's arrival. I tried to look into his eyes to look believable, but I myself looked away, as if I had lost something on the floor and could not find it. "You are, right, Sasuke's friend who should replace me?" I put on my coat and insisted that I was looking for something. "By the way, what time is it?" 1:30. Karin, the Uchiha wanted to say something else, but I interrupted her, as if I hadn't heard. "I should get at least one taxi." Okay, Sakura, bye. I'll try to visit you tomorrow. See you. And immediately jumped out of the room. At home I felt ashamed of my outburst, not really remembering anything. I remembered my raised and hysterical, implausible voice, the color on my face and my dull gaze into nowhere. I justified myself to the guys as best I could, but I still haven't explained my behavior to myself. I think I settled on the fact that I was terribly tired after the turmoil at work and wanted to sleep. I didn't believe it myself. Before going to bed, I took out a frame with a wedding photo of the Uchihas and looked at the contrasting faces of others for a long time, ashamed to look at my pitiful expression. Ino was a calm, already married woman, and against her background Sakura looked like a happy girl trying on a veil. Sasuke smiled restrainedly at the camera with his whole face, and Naruto laughed loudly, depressed, blatantly lying with his fun, staged according to reason. I looked at myself, ashamed in advance of the tortured look and tear-stained eyes that were clearly visible in the black and white photograph. I contrasted with everyone, especially Naruto. Having placed the frame on the floor, I fell asleep with a living shame that burned my whole body. That day I didn't go to work. I called my boss, lied that I had been poisoned, and he let me go, wishing me not to get sick. I decided that our office would not lose anything from my one-day absence, because we have entire floors of cleaners, economists, laboratory assistants, that everyone will find something to their liking, even if I am not there. These are not specialists in the field of medicine, of which we have a dozen throughout the entire enterprise, not counting the nurses in the buildings. Frustrated by everything that was happening in my life, I decided for myself that I would spend today in bed and watch the dreams that my consciousness threw up in my delirium. A week ago, which seemed like a dream, reality was now gradually boring me, but I diligently feigned the desire to both sleep and not get up, and periodically fell asleep. My position has its advantages, I noted sarcastically. I'll get some sleep and go to Sakura and look at Yasuko. Naruto would probably go home. He can't be with the love of his life for that long. I then pulled myself together with the thought that I was jealous, but then I didn't believe it myself, deciding that I was angry with him for promising to call when he went on vacation with his woman. Far from him, I could invent many things, feelings, decisions. Irritated, I buried my face in the pillow, tucked my legs under my chest, tensed my whole body and held my breath. In the silence, untouched even by the rustle of bed linen, my stomach growled loudly and the phone rang. Damn you all! I screamed, getting out of bed. Having reached the machine, which stood in the corridor, I answered the call in the same voice. I'm listening. Hello, did you find out? Orochimaru, hello. How can one not recognize you? Now I spoke joyfully, with pleasure because of the interesting interlocutor. I'm glad. What's up? Nothing special. Recently I was removed from the project, although I think this is, on the contrary, for the better. At least I'm getting enough sleep. Is it because of the war? After a little hesitation, I answered. Yes. I do not think so. Most likely, it was beneficial to remove you. I think so too, but... Do you want me to return you to the project? The teacher suddenly interrupted me. They have lost a very valuable employee, their mistake needs to be corrected. Thank you, Orochimaru, but I don't think it's worth it. I have no time for career growth right now, especially since it takes a lot of energy. As you wish, you could feel from his voice that he was smiling. I was going to visit your town, I hope you will agree to meet with me. See you? See you later, teacher. After hanging up, I went to the kitchen and began to sluggishly, thoughtfully look for something edible. Orochimaru never left my mind, he never called to find out about my well-being, mood, life in general, but he called now and asked questions concerning me. Me. It was obvious that he had plans for our office. And what kind of plans were there? Having found a pack of pasta in one of the drawers near the sink, I put a pot of water on the gas stove, lit the burner and sat down faithfully to wait for the sewer H2O to boil. On the opposite side of the table lay yesterday's newspaper, and out of boredom I took it and began to read it with feigned interest. After a couple of seconds it threw it back. The unexpected and rough, sharp rustling of the pages frightened me. The first line read, "Progress. America is ahead of the Soviet Union, and not a word about Poland. Idiots. These stupid censorship idiots. Democracy. Ha. If it weren't for the click of the key in the door lock, I probably would have continued to ardently hate our state and all officials, along with Roosevelt. At first it seemed to me that my mother had returned, but subsequent memories of the accident forced me to think soberly. I immediately stopped break-ins and robberies because the sound was monotonous and confident. That left Sasuke, but he never came without calling and didn't open it himself unless necessary. "Sasuke, why did you come?" I ran to the door and was right in my doubts. My guest was not an Uchiha. On the threshold, as friendly as only he could, stood Uzumaki with a package in his hands. It's difficult to describe what I felt then. The hack was unsuccessful, he mumbled guiltily, and I allowed myself to laugh. "What happened to you? You look like I'm a ghost." "There is little. Why did you come?" "I think we need to explain ourselves." Naruto suddenly changed his face, and I no longer looked at him. "I think we should explain." Naruto changed dramatically, his face took on serious expressions, his voice became firmer and clearer, as if Uzumaki wanted to give me an order. "About what?" Trying to maintain the saving atmosphere of easy communication, I asked. "Why did you run away so quickly tonight?" Military comrade, according to the rules of etiquette, it is indecent to answer a question with a question. "Who taught you good manners?" After remembering my mother, I never wanted to cry or be sad. "Go forward, just forward, without turning back, without looking around." I remembered an excerpt from the song. "And never lose heart, go forward without looking back. In general, let's go to the dining room, which is the kitchen, and sit down. You are standing on my doorstep and haven't even closed the door." Naruto smiled faintly and began to rummage through the lock with the precision of a jeweler. For some reason it seemed to me that he had difficulty playing the role of a serious person, that he would rather laugh than interrogate me about all sorts of trifles. This made things much calmer. "Why do you speak with a German accent?" When Naruto walked into the kitchen and saw a pack of noodles and a pot already boiling, he offered me some ramen that I couldn't refuse. And now, greedily swallowing the American ambassador's Japanese soup, I asked him everything that came to my mind, so long as he didn't ask. For the last 6 months I served in Germany. Me and a couple of other Japanese were sent there for reconnaissance. True, it still didn't work out to get to the bottom of anything. It's good that they picked us up on time. "I see you like ramen." "From the first spoon. Sasuke fed me it yesterday." "And whose is better?" "You ask. And by the way, thank you for saving my pasta from a pointless death." "Come on." The silence was uncomfortable and constricting for me. It was as if we both wanted to say something, but were afraid, thinking that the other was about to start first and everything would go by itself. After this half-breakfast half-lunch, very soon, I realized that such feelings were alien to Naruto, that he would easily step over them in search of the truth. Having finished my ramen, I put the bowl in the sink, turned on the cold water tap and, discreetly wetting my hand, ran it across my forehead. I was terribly hot when the room was cool. "Are you going to see Sakura at the hospital?" he finally asked. "I saw Yasuko today, she's so beautiful. Very similar to Uchiha as a child." "That's what I was going to do." "Do you think his father or mother is not there?" "The last time I didn't make the best impression on them, I got drunk and started pestering Sasuke. Or have they already forgotten, huh? You know them better." "And when was this?" Muffled laughter was heard from behind. "At graduation." Fortunately, I didn't come across them at the wedding. He was probably right when he laughed, because after so many years everything terrible becomes funny and stupid. But remembering the contemptuous look of Sasuke's father, I decided that in this case psychology was wrong and I would always be embarrassed to catch the eye of the older generation of Uchihas. Mikoto-sama will definitely forgive, she's good, but Fugako-san. I don't think so. But other than that, what's the difference? It's not a fact that they are there yet. I turned to face Naruto, in which he could easily understand that I was very surprised. Do you address them with a suffix? Yes, they arrived from Japan quite recently. It's hard for them to get used to it. And you? What? When did you come to America? Naruto's name isn't English. I've been living here since birth, it's just that my parents, like Sasuke's parents, are native Japanese. They moved here due to some circumstances. My grandfather also swam here. Knows why. He wanted wealth. I don't even know why they left the islands. Yes, I wasn't interested at first. And then they got into an accident on Route 15. I miraculously managed to survive. I always thought this place was amazing, my mother crashed there too. My voice sounded dry, as if I was talking about a trifle or uninteresting news reports about the latest sewing. I couldn't break my promise to my father: when you talk to someone about her death, don't show your feelings. Even in front of me. No, especially in front of me. Otherwise I feel guilty. Very sharp turn and only 2 lines of movement. And trucks pass there every hour, and 1 line is not enough for them to turn around. And a well-drunk high school student crashed into us. I was 8 then. I'm 11, I looked at my watch. Okay. We took the wrong path. We started for health, but ended, will you wait a little? Waiting for a nod, I left the kitchen and headed to my room. 10 minutes later I was already wearing old jeans and a light black sweater, the last gift from my father before he disappeared from my life forever. We left the apartment, silently and occasionally smiling. But we only had masks on. And I was so depressed that all I needed was laughter. Being in my stomach, Yasuko reconciled me with a new life without Sasuke and without the hope of being with him. Giving me the opportunity to be with them. I was the odd one out in the Uchiha family, and only sometimes, when Suigetsu came from his cold Canada, did I feel like a full and appropriate part of what was happening. At other times, I was assigned the role of a warm bird. The appearance of Yasuko, I thought, would reconcile me with this place in the play. Personally, Yasuko and I met on the 3rd or 2nd day after her birth. I entered the incubator and saw her behind the glass, half a meter away from me, sleeping, having recently eaten. Sakura, excited and seemingly joyful, asked me, "Isn't she beautiful?" I nodded continuously and looked at my bosom newborn friend, whom I was ready to indulge in everything. She even woke up while we were standing opposite her, and smiled at me and my mother, everyone around, the whole world, herself. That was the first time I saw her mother's green eyes, which contrasted with her father's pale skin and the barely visible black tuft of hair on her head. I involuntarily wanted to give birth to another incredibly pretty and sweet girl myself, so that little Uchiha would not be lonely, but I soon admitted that. "Karin," Sakura said thoughtfully but confidently, "why did you leave so quickly tonight?" I didn't think that she would be interested in it either, but the learned and practiced answer sounded convincing even to her. I was terribly sleepy, and I had to go to work. I waved it off, without taking my eyes off the alluring emerald eyes. "It's not true, right?" she asked in the same voice. "Where did you get the idea?" I looked at the red face of the excited man and was afraid to say at least one more dishonest word. "You looked unnatural," she said calmly, although she herself looked more than unnatural, ready to scream. She whispered with the confidence of a lecturer. I understood why she studied me so well, and I was not surprised. I am constant, unchanging, I am yesterday and today. But my petty lies annoyed me, because even I, the main stubborn director, believed in it. If you understand this, then you know the answer, I said to myself and to her. After all, if I wasn't in a hurry to get to work, where was I running from? Sakura suddenly started babbling nervously, stuttering, trying to quickly pronounce the right words. Do you like him? When are you going to check out? I answered evasively, wanting her to smile at my naivety and childish shame, but she didn't understand it. Karin, why are you asking this? She shouted angrily, even angrily, waving her arms. Please answer me. Frightened by the sudden change in Sakura, I answered as she wanted, without admitting anything to myself. Yes. She ran up to me and hugged me tightly by the neck, almost hanging me. She was crying, and I couldn't understand what it meant, why she took it so personally, why she even asked. What are you doing? I asked carefully. Sorry, Sakura whispered. Apparently, after pregnancy I became too emotional. She took a handkerchief from her nightgown pocket and began to wipe away her tears. He is like a brother to me. And I understand that it is my own fault that he suffers so much. But everything will be fine now, right? Will you make him happy? No matter how she rubbed her eyes, it brought no results. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks and chin, falling in large drops onto her clothes. I nodded so as not to aggravate her condition. Thank you, Karin, thank you. She hugged me again, even tighter, and began repeating in a whisper. You will save him, you will save him. When Sakura pulled away from me, she was very weak. I brought her to the room where Naruto and Sasuke were sitting. The door opened, and both young men saw the new mother hanging exhausted on my shoulders. They jumped up. Sasuke took his wife in his arms and laid her on the bed, covering her with a blanket. There was unconcealed concern in Uzumaki's gaze. Then the Uchiha asked us to take a walk. He did not explain why. Everything was obvious. The birth of a child took a lot of energy from her. And also lack of sleep. Did you want to talk to me? I asked when we walked out onto the hospital alley. Yes, Naruto smiled. Can I ask first? I waited for him to nod. How long have you known Sakura? From 5 years. We went to kindergarten together. And you've loved her ever since? He did not answer, as if it was the first time he had been openly asked about his love for her. My question seemed unexpected and sharp to me, tearing apart the already familiar and studied distances. After all, how close I got to his heart, having known him for only 3 days. Naruto suddenly slowed down and sighed as he thought about his answer. After a few seconds, he easily said, yes. And you know, now it seems to me that all my life I loved her like a sister. Or so it seems lately. I myself have been confused for a long time. But there is no desire to delve into the past. I listened to him inattentively, thinking about Sakura and her words. The second question was asked as if not by me. Have you ever suffered because of her? Naruto quickly and without hesitation answered. Never. I stopped, raised my head to look at his face and see if he was lying, and for the first time I noticed a considerable difference in height, equal to about 5 inches. Men, I burst out, not finding any confirmation in the expression of his face. But please convince Sakura of this. I've always told her this, but she doesn't believe me. Naruto stood across from me and spoke as if he sincerely believed that I knew how to save Sakura, how to calm her down now that it was even more necessary. But I couldn't. Not realizing then that I was already the key to this, at first I wanted to say something meaningless, inspiring, truism, but unable to help, and then in dull anger I clenched my teeth and, ashamed, turned away. Naruto understood everything and said, continuing to walk forward. Let's change theme. For example, I wanted to tell you why I didn't call after the wedding, he said, upset, but sharply, unexpectedly even for himself. I followed him, moving my legs quickly to catch up. I tried to distract myself from thoughts about Sakura, and when he said something about me, for some reason I forgot about her. Sasuke foolishly signed a contract with the American military forces, Naruto began, laughing at himself now, because he was speaking implausibly and reluctantly, and at past adventures. But then his affair with Sakura began, and the day before the wedding he offers me to replace him in the service, saying that the Americans don't care which Japanese they send. That's how I ended up overseas as a spy in Germany, and that's how I started lying to Sakura that I met my love and went with her to Hawaii, he said, resisting his excuse, because he didn't find interest in my face. He often looked at me and got lost every time. It was unpleasant for him that he had to make excuses when in fact everything was clear. It was clear that he was not the kind of person who would promise and forget, that he was not the kind of person who was capable of lying. The image of Sakura flashed before my eyes again, ghostly, visible only to me, ideological. Why did you agree? I asked, interpreting the idea of the subconscious in this way. Why did you lie to her? I remember how deep and unusual my voice became on this, her. So that she doesn't think that I'm doing this because of her. But you did? Naruto didn't answer. But the time he carved out on a piece of the hospital alley did not think about how to answer correctly in order to justify himself again. Instead, he smiled at what was swarming in his head and looked at the sky with his hands behind his head. He smiled at Sasuke asking him to replace him, and at the sky, which glowed with the same impenetrable whiteout as 9 months ago. I didn't understand him and made the most ridiculous and stupid assumption, a desire to help America? And he began to describe Sasuke, whom I had never seen. I'll come as soon as I can. Sakura, well, I'm sorry, but work is such a hassle, it's a whole mess. Yes, I will still. The main thing is don't worry. Whoa? No, I'll get there myself. Yes, I'll be glad to see him. Although it would be better if he froze in his own Canada. Okay, don't take the work line. Bye. I was then prone to aggression at work, and it didn't cost me anything, wanting to see a colleague killed by a terrible image, throwing a pipe at the device, as if cutting off the rope holding the guillotine blade. After Sakura's call, there was a reason to do this with special pleasure. It was a bad day, all the deadlines for submitting research papers for the last month were approaching, a blonde pig was coming from cold and nasty Canada, and I was late for the celebration of Sakura and Yasuko returning from the hospital. What was more offensive was that everyone was fine and calm and no one was going to move to let the woman flying from the stairs pass. The ill-fated steps and a few turns were soon behind me, and a wonderful view of the cramped workspace allocated to me in the aisle opened up to my eyes. Stacks of important papers, a couple of flasks with a liquid unknown to me for examination remained standing in place, without moving or disappearing into the oblivion of hell. They were joined by the boss, proudly sitting on a chair, who was not particularly difficult to recognize from the back. No one else in the entire building wore a dark green robe and did not resemble a gorilla with his stooped and huge body. For the 100th time I regretted that I refused Orochimaru's offer. Eric, I'm sorry, but I can't handle so many reports alone. I begged, running half-bent to the table. This should have gotten through to him, it always worked for me, as a boss. You need to finish by the time your receiver arrives. But, his voice softened, one person wanted to help you with this. She also studies the characteristics of the human body and medicine. I hope you get along. Eric was funny to such an extent that the only thing he caused towards himself was sarcasm. I was irritated by his dull face with no prominent eyes, dull eyes that did not express emotions and ideas with heavy, decrepit wrinkled eyelids hanging over them, and a mouth that spoke of something empty and non-existent. He was so gray in himself that his bright and pompous words about democracy, America, Roosevelt were infuriating, because it was obvious that he was deliberately lying. His words did not come from stupidity, but from a desire to subjugate, in order to obey faithfully. He would not be a patriot of his homeland, he was a faithful slave of the state. But he was old and honestly went through the First World War. Who? I asked politely. She should come now. She went out to make coffee, he answered, looking behind him. The kitchen was in that direction. Like the heroine of a popular detective story with minor keys and abruptly interrupted music, a short Chinese woman with a strange, bizarre hairstyle of brown hair came around the corner. Her figure was hidden by a shapeless robe, carefully ironed and buttoned with all the buttons. She came up to us, thoughtful, serious, and inside I was unpleasantly frightened by the upcoming work with a concentrated and overly intelligent, radical person. I thought she would turn out to be a boring professor. But she came so close to me to extend her hand that I noticed small wrinkles in the corners of her small mouth and eyes and decided that in her 30 years this woman had smiled too often. That's why I thought she was charming. Only at first our feelings were not mutual. She introduced herself reservedly, even primly. "Nice to meet you, Takahashi Tenten," she said, raising and lowering my hand, as men do. "You can just call me Karin." I also shook her hand, but did it sluggishly, ashamed of my position and her attitude towards me. After all, my removal did not become a mark of the state, but was imprinted on me in full color. If she read my file, she definitely didn't know that I was deprived of a high post because of my nationality and political brawls. To her, I seemed to be an irresponsible and uneducated former boss. "Then for you I'm just 1010. I heard that you worked on this project from the very beginning and were an irreplaceable employee. It must be hard to lose this place over a trifle." A trifle later turned out to be a systematic absence from work over the last month. It was a blatant, ungodly lie about a man who slept on the job, but acceptable so as not to reduce me to dirt. "Eric, you can go," she said, also seriously and distantly. "Okay, Taylor." He walked away. Tenten rolled her eyes and slumped tiredly, but theatrically, onto the chair Eric had left behind. She finally lived up to her wrinkles. "Oh, these Americans. Is it really so difficult for them to pronounce an Eastern name?" She took a deep breath and turned to me, speaking more slowly and kindly. "You're Japanese, aren't you? The name Karin is very popular there, at least over the last 10 years that I lived there. I met girls with that name quite often." 1/4, I smiled broadly, remaining standing still. I always loved it when serious people turned out to be childish. It's easier to communicate with them. "And it turns out that your grandfather or grandmother gave you the name?" "No. At first they wanted to call me Karin, but my father wrote I instead of D. Although my mother didn't care about the documents, and she called me Karin until her death. My condolences. And I'm sorry. I didn't know that my questions could lead to this," Tenten said bashfully, without taking her eyes off me. "It's okay, it was a long time ago," I answered, really not feeling anything. "Do you know who will replace me?" "This name won't give you anything," she said, cheering up and cheerful again. "One thing I know for sure, they will fail with this guy. In the end, due to some oversight, the curator needs to be changed." Haha. Although, maybe that's not the point. And what? Maybe they want to close the project to open a new one or save money. Her idea was plausible, I thought, remembering the outbreak of the war. Carrying out a project for a new grail, when soon some battle could fall on our lands, was stupid, presumptuous and costly. But so much has been invested in this project over the past 10 years of its implementation that I could not stand it and succumb to my feelings. My hands chaotically wrote hieroglyphs unknown to the world in the air. The face turned red with indignation and resentment. "What? Why, yes, this is impossible. This is the project of the century." In order not to demolish the flask standing on the table, I sat down opposite Tenten. "Let's not worry in vain," she said. "We're not sitting here over a cup of coffee. Let's do what we came here for. Do you just need to sign them?" She nodded her head at the table with papers. "And check some. It's about the vaccine. But this stack, I pointed to the pile of papers trying to fall to the floor, needs to be divided by date and stamped. You can read them if you're interested, they're reaction notes. Not an enviable job. Especially when compared with experiments, Tenten smiled. Eric said that for me it should turn out to be simple. What makes him think that I'm a paper worm? But it's safe. When I answered her with a weak, sad grin, she continued, okay, I'll start with the dates and stamps, and you sign the papers. Fine. I didn't notice how the next hour and a half flew by, completely immersed in work. To my surprise, my former subordinates did not make a single mistake in their reports, all graphs and diagrams were drawn up correctly, every formula was carefully verified, and the handwriting was legible. Pride trembled in my soul, because before I was supervising the project, papers were the dirtiest work, and no one voluntarily took on it, but after that these were the results. I wonder if they decided to celebrate my dismissal like this? Tenten's thoughtful voice was heard after an hour and a half, Rin, I'm finished. How are you there? I don't have any left. I looked at the table in confusion and noticed another stack of waste paper, there's still a lot. It's already halftime, can you handle it in 30 minutes? Even if I know all the experiments by heart, I can't do it. I saved this pile until better times, but today they are clearly not. And what kind of papers are these? This is the progress of work. Before I could finish speaking, someone's wide hand fell on my shoulder. I shuddered in surprise and quickly, without thinking, decided that the smug Eric was standing behind me, the only person in the building who could so brazenly approach me from behind. I waited for him to say something, coming up with an acceptable excuse for my delay. Without turning around, I looked at Tenten. Her reaction surprised me, she smiled widely, revealing her straight teeth. Naruto. What people? Not understanding anything, I carefully tilted my head back and looked at the fictional Eric. A familiar face looked down at me, making an absurd face. Ready to use a couple of strong American curses, I abruptly stood up from my seat. Why be so scary? Do you want to send me to the next world? Sorry, I didn't mean to. I honestly didn't even know you were here. I only recognized him by his hair. The guilty smile on his face became even wider, which was terribly annoying. I'm with Tenten about my transfer. I was hoping that I missed you, an offended whisper was heard behind me. And what exactly do you want from me? Naruto tilted his head to the side, looked over my shoulder at Tenten and said. Tenten, you know that I was transferred to the landing force, but they still haven't seen my documents. You have them. For a moment I thought I had heard this name before. But the feeling of familiarity quickly dissipated, not allowing me to cling tightly to myself. Considering that I had time to get used to the repeated syllables that are unusual for the American ear, I continued listening to the conversation between Naruto and Tenten. After thinking for a minute, she replied. They are in the third building, and you know how far it is to go. Will you come tomorrow? I'll be there all day. Okay, I'll come in the morning. He turned his gaze to me, smiling. Should you wait? For what? I said incomprehensibly. Are you going to the Uchihas? Turning around, I plopped down on the wooden seat, offended. You can't imagine how much I want it. But these reports. I completely forgot about them. Karin, Tenten suddenly turned, but I didn't give her words any meaning. I can help you. The person who will oversee this project is an old friend of mine. Tomorrow morning he'll be here just to pick up the papers, and then he'll go to the lab at George Washington University to sort out his resignation papers. Well, to put it simply, he will be busy until the evening. She stopped. Now I didn't miss a word. I know where he lives, and believe me, he will not refuse if you bring the reports to his home, and he will spend the extra 2 hours in a warm bed in the arms of his wife. So you're relatively free today. Tenten laughed quietly, but stopped when she saw a grimace of doubt on my face. Eric is not a problem, he will definitely listen to me. So have fun. Before Tenten could laugh again, I hugged her tightly, cheerfully thanking her and giving compliment after compliment to her good figure. Having freed her from my joy and burden, I began to get ready. There must have been a great desire coming from me a mile away to be as far away from this building as possible. Tenten, finding a blank piece of paper on the table, wrote down the address of my receiver and put it in my pocket. When my savior passed by Naruto, she gave him a meaningful look and said, "Tomorrow I will give you a medical card, and the address is in your bag." Jane. Goodbye, I said and, instantly forgetting about Tenten and the report, turned to face Naruto. Hooray. I exhaled. ______. Japanese, bye. English. See you. The road to the Uchiha nest was short, straight and unrecognizable. The taxi turned at most once, and from the window the bright, even vulgar colors of the signs of bars and shops did not hurt the eyes. I could then guess that I was not being taken to the guys, or assume that this was a shorter road, and that's why the taxi driver chose it, but I was too worried about Naruto's smile in the rearview mirror. He didn't say a word. We've arrived. The driver suddenly and loudly boomed in his steely voice, developed over the years. Tired and indignant, I leaned forward and patted the driver on the shoulder, saying that this was definitely not House 20 on Morgan Street. We didn't go there. The young man said number 13 Happy Street, and I took him there. Ask him what my problem is. He muttered the last words loudly. I got out of the car after Naruto, and he explained everything to me. Sasuke recently finalized the documents for this apartment, and today they moved into it. He handed the money to the driver and slammed the door well, but not loudly. Didn't he tell you? I shook my head. All my life it didn't matter where the Uchihas lived, on Morgan Street, on Happy, or in Tokyo. They were always there, and that's the main thing. My head was spinning after the cloying and nauseating smell of the upholstery, and with my body I played along with the short and weak trees dancing in the kingdom of the wind, involuntarily, thinking quite well, just wanting it. The air on the street was lighter, fresher, thinner than in a closed taxi cabin. It was like a good summer perfume after the stuffy and annoying aroma of some woman's perfume in the subway. On the street I felt better, and I walked slowly, inhaling both my mouth and nose the cold of the coming autumn. Come quickly. Naruto called me, walking forward. You don't want to be still late, do you? I nodded weakly and ran towards him, trying to catch up, and then I really regretted it. Karin. What a meeting. Suigetsu. I didn't expect to see you here. I lied, without doubting that he understood. My words were far from the truth. Despite many years of polar relations with each other, we hugged tightly, paying tribute to the years spent sitting at the same desk. No matter how much Suigetsu's personality was disgusting to me all my life, I was always sincerely glad to see him again, although I always saw him off, hating him. For some reason his feelings were the opposite. When I let him go, Sasuke shouted helplessly from the kitchen, who was taken by surprise by his duties as the keeper of the hearth. Naruto, Suigetsu, Karin. Someone help. The guys left me to undress and rushed to help the drowning man. Having taken off my coat and formal black shoes with unforgivable heels, I hesitated in the hallway and not knowing where to go, began to examine every square centimeter of the new Uchiha apartment. Naruto warned me that it was small, but cozy and even practical. Sasuke took care of the renovations and furniture before his girls moved in, and the layout itself was excellent. 2 average-sized rooms, not rectangular around the perimeter and with recesses in wall, but a large kitchen and hallway. True, he said, the bathroom and toilet are adjacent. Walking along the long corridor gut, I was convinced of Uzumaki's words. walls painted in a dark green matte color with light green bamboo patterns, fancy hangers in the shape of pandas and other animals, slender wardrobes and chests of drawers that do not stand out in their fashionability from the exhibition of a Japanese forest. Everything it was soothing with its purity and natural clarity, as if everything should have been arranged, painted, drawn this way. Everything was correct and natural, not like outside the front door, different, deeper. At the end of the hallway along the right wall, opposite the windows, there were 4 doors. I knocked on the very last one, on which 3 fairies were skillfully burned, hoping that Sakura was standing right behind it. Her caring and calm voice quietly called to me. "Karin, come in." With polite precision, trying not to make a sound, I entered the nursery. I was afraid that even a random rustle could wake Yasuko. Sakura, noticing this in my every leisurely movement and facial expression, just smiled and continued to rock the cradle, humming a melody unfamiliar to me. "She's so cute when she falls asleep," Sakura said in a whisper, literally taking her eyes off the baby for a second. I came closer to look at my bosom friend. The feeling that I was superfluous in the relationship between daughter and mother did not leave me, and I did not violate the fictitious border of their world, remaining a little away. If Sakura had left, I would have tormented Yasuko by planning our first weekend together or playing daughter-mother or test pilot. But Sakura did not leave, and I was left with the role of an irrepressible, barely calmed spectator. Even now I remember Yasuko's sweet face in the first week of her life, and I even remember how she sniffed that day, quietly and as if. Sakura suddenly leaned down, lowered her head into the cradle, and kissed the baby on her white forehead. "Let's go, otherwise the boys are already waiting for us," she said, and I, disarmed and peaceful, nodded and went out first. The guys also thought that we were late, even if they had a purely male conversation among themselves, which they stopped with disappointment after our arrival. In retaliation, Suigetsu decided to mention the woman's characteristic habit of being late for important meetings. To which I responded in the usual pompous and illiterate tone of a seasoned courtesan, with a slight burr. Yes, to hell with these meetings. For some reason, our relationship with him was always a fine line between black and dirty vulgarity and something pure and sincere. "That's why I love this woman," moaned the drunken Hozuki, leaning towards the first plane of the dihedral angle of our relationship. "But you lost to me more often." I laughed quietly and articulately for the show, pronouncing every ha. Sasuke grinned, supporting me, and in my heart I celebrated my absolute victory. Dream. I was always ahead. Oh. But I always pissed you off. But you always started first, the Uchiha noted. And he did it because of his main loss. Wow. I will give you this victory, he addressed me. But in the coming days I will prove that you hate me more than I hate you. Celebrate, my dears, but not for long, Suigetsu muttered angrily, draining his glass of champagne in gulps. Sakura and I were already sitting at the table, but a new conversation did not start, with the exception of the newly arrived Suigetsu, who had taken some water into his mouth. Everyone knew everything about each other, and events that could be discussed, as luck would have it, did not happen. We were so little affected by the war, that we were aware of our wretchedness in front of the Europeans and did not talk about battles. After drinking more, Hozuki came to his senses and began asking everyone one by one. Mentions began about work, questions about personal life and stupid answers with malicious grins on their lips and meaningful glances. He was interested in learning more about us, and we didn't even think about what to say, we voiced the first thing that came to mind. So I unsuccessfully and cheerfully told about my demotion, although everyone knew what the project was for me. And why were you deprived of your position? We'll deal with that. And I laughed. Lost position? News from yesterday. Naruto. Shouted the main Y of the evening, and Sakura and Sasuke shushed him, the child is sleeping. He nodded and showed a gesture of calm with his palm and continued, have you known them for a long time? Do you also know this woman? She's disgusting. I hear everything. And also harmful, creepy. She's still a psychopath. Naruto, also a failed teetotaler who drank, answered exactly the questions asked, without clinging to Suigetsu's comments. I've known Sasuke and Sakura since kindergarten, and I met Karin at a wedding. Do you think she's terrible? Here he had nowhere to dodge. He looked at me and smiled kindly, apologizing for his answer. Yes, I think she's a terrible person. About. Suigetsu happily clapped his hands. Like-minded person. Then now, as a sign of submission to my cult against Karin, you must tell her something like that. He tried to draw something on his fingers. The main thing is not to love her. And even in her abnormality there are peculiarly beautiful things. Suigetsu. I couldn't stand it anymore. She's blushing, he sang. Woman. You're in the way. I haven't had a companion for a long time. Naruto, why are you delaying? I don't fit the bill on one point, he laughed. I sympathize, Hozuki said, as if the topic of conversation was the sudden rain that spoiled plans. Karin, I'll have to ruin your life alone. About. Blushing. Yes, go to you. Teenage naive thoughts turned my head. I thought what Naruto meant, and I blushed even more, guessing the obvious. Even Yasuko, at 5 years old, laughed at my stupidity at 26 when I recounted to her the first good memories that came to mind. But then it was so scary to answer myself honestly. That evening we drank to the health of an old school friend, Yugo, who had returned to his homeland of Japan, and to Sasuke's good friend from high school, Jack Worrell, who had died in a plane crash. One of us then made a prophetic toast, then let's drink to the future generation. And may it lead the world out of ruin and chaos. The night in September in our temperate tropical climate zone was black, but in the city it was black and orange. The unnatural and miserable light of the lanterns hurt the eyes and, as one Soviet poet, Mandelstam, described the night guards, it looked like fish oil, poured with dull benevolence on the roads and courtyards. I walked heavily on the orange asphalt floating before my eyes. Bright signs were reflected in the puddles that I didn't bother to avoid, my head was buzzing and I felt slightly nauseous. I had an intolerance to alcohol and, after taking a sip, I could not control myself, I felt weak and drowsy. And that evening, for the first time, I withstood the blows of 4 toasts, washed down with champagne, and stood cheerfully until the very end, until the owners began to kick us out. Behind me, walking in step, Naruto and Suigetsu walked slowly. Hozuki loudly and persistently argued and tried to justify something, he was tongue-tied, and Uzumaki agreed and laughed. When Sasuke saw us off, it was decided that we would spend the night with Naruto, who lived nearby. The owner of the lodging house provided was not against it, but they didn't ask us, deciding that it would be a big hassle to transport us, drunk and rebellious, to our homes. How much longer? I asked repeatedly, turning to Naruto. We took too long to get to someone who lives nearby. Finally he answered when we entered the arch of one of the courtyards. Next is the front door. Hey! Where are you in such a hurry? Wait for us. He caught up with me in a couple of steps, hugged me by the shoulder and smiled brazenly and smugly, whispering in my ear. Don't run, I still have nothing to get over my hangover with. Indignant, I broke away from his embrace. Wanting to respond just as venomously, I ran through all the curses and sarcastic excuses on my tongue, but my carousel was spinning so quickly that I didn't say anything worthwhile and only cunningly narrowed my eyes so as not to fall face first into fish oil. As if at gunpoint, he hastily apologized. I was joking, and smiled. Having slept for 3 hours, I quietly got up at 3:30 and, taking documents from my bag, sat comfortably in Naruto's small but very cozy kitchen, checking the reports. At first I couldn't concentrate, looking at the room with photographs of little Naruto with a saucepan and a woman with long red hair, his mother, hanging on the wall, with cartoonish flower salt crafts depicting the entire Uzumaki family in different situations. Each frame had apparently been painted outside, so large chunks of the blue wall were smeared or splattered with blue, green, red and purple gouache. And the light was not orange, it was white, calming. Deprived of the ability to contemplate, I was quickly drawn into the practical business of checking, and I sat with my pen until the yawning Naruto arrived, ghost gliding past and clumsily putting the kettle on. I watched him, distracted from my work, as he took milk from the outside refrigerator and cups and spoons and sugar from the shelves. Sitting down next to him, he put everything on the table and finally asked, "Would you like some tea?" I nodded. "I can offer it with milk, sugar and tea leaves," he said sluggishly and sleepily, although he tried to joke. "I don't care," I said, assuring with my signature the accuracy of the described experience with Margaret the rat. "Don't you remember when Tenten told her friend to deliver documents? Until 9? "Yes," Naruto answered. "Then he must have other things to do with his previous job." When Uzumaki remembered Tenten's words, he frowned weirdly, and I smiled at it, unnoticed by him. My working day starts at 8, so I wondered if I had a chance to make it in time. Okay, there's a little left." "Then I'm not here," he said, and the kettle whistled. It was impossible to work with the same attention and pedantry, and with an uncritical eye I found 2 or 3 mistakes in the entire half hour. Having signed the last sheet of paper with the note, "Corrections in pen" made by former curator, I finished and began to enjoy the tea and sandwiches placed in front of me. My stomach growled gratefully, and then fell silent nobly. After once again thanking me for saving the walls of my esophagus, Naruto suddenly said, noticing that I was starting to rise from the table, "Wait for me. I'm in the same direction." Okay, I got up and, to stall for time, began to wash my cup. "Shall we leave Suigetsu here? He usually sleeps until 12. Suigetsu is not a princess to be locked in the prince's tower. Suigetsu will go back to the hotel to get some sleep." A sleepy, monotonous and dissatisfied voice was heard. Hozuki yawned masterfully behind Naruto's back. Naruto offered him tea and sandwiches, he agreed and sat down in the vacated seat. The morning began to flow lazily, grayly and silently. Suigetsu was slurping, Naruto was cleaning, and I decided to wash all the dishes we had used that morning. But the happiness did not last long. "I'm late." I came to my senses, having washed everything. "Naruto, Suigetsu, let's hurry up." While getting dressed, I shouted from the living room where I slept at night. "How long does it take to get to Bud Avenue?" The question remained unanswered, just as questions about the weather or mood actually remain unanswered. We got ready very quickly, although I hurried the guys for a long time and loudly. They probably laughed, and I was not yet accustomed to the teachers. The main thing is what they do. At the tram stop, we parted ways with Suigetsu, who needed to go to Golden Street, and went down to the subway. Date, from the 7th of December. On December 7th, the fate of all Japanese living in America, and the Americans themselves, was decided. The United States entered World War II, sided with the Russians and other Allied powers, and took over the Japanese military forces entirely. What happened with Pearl Harbor brought to the surface all the years of hidden hatred of the Japanese and completely exposed the glacier of American selfishness. The next day, an investigation began, the instigator of which was Roosevelt himself, and many Japanese who did not inspire confidence were imprisoned with their families. They said they contributed in every possible way to the attack, and someone even burned arrows in the cornfield pointing to the port. Pearl Harbor affected me once in 1941. Naruto transferred from his former command to the 442nd Japanese American Infantry Regiment, which was sent to Italy in early January. Sasuke also went as a soldier of the 442nd Regiment. Everything was falling apart. I was so scared that it seemed like there was a war outside the window. Date, Christmas. Neither of us were Catholics. Sasuke and I were atheists, Naruto was a Protestant, and Sakura was a faithful believer in Shinto Buddhism, and so we never celebrated Christmas, usually only supporting the New Year's spirit of neighboring Americans. But after the 7th of December, the relaxed Christmas mood was so contagious, and the New Year seemed so far away that Sakura and I, by the evening of the 23rd or 24th, brought home the Christmas tree ourselves, and while Sasuke was not at home and Yasuko was sleeping, we began decorating it. Sasuke and Sakura's room was geographically larger, but the entire area was occupied by a large double bed, a desk with a chair and wardrobes with books and clothes. Because of Yasuko, it was impossible to put a Christmas tree in the nursery, and the corridor was too narrow for the lush tree that we chose. In the kitchen, 8 square meters of which were unoccupied and had been worn down to the texture of oak by Sasuke's shuffling. We put the Christmas tree in a bucket, secured it to the pipes with ropes and took out a box of paper toys. The light was only on in the kitchen, the windows of which were not visible either from the yard or from the street, and Sakura locked the door, afraid that she would get too carried away. The guys arrived at 10. And from their loud conversation it became clear that they decided that we were not there and we were walking with Yasuko. "Why do you think so?" Naruto asked in a voice, but still trying to whisper, rustling the coats and autumn jackets on the hangers. Sasuke was confident in his decision, but he spoke tiredly and sluggishly, bored. "There's no stroller on the stairs. That day Mrs. Stoss just asked to remove it, and we rolled it into Yasuko's room. There's no light on in the nursery, and here too, not a single woman's coat hangs, which they hung with their own in the dark." Naruto quickly gave in and began speaking loudly as usual. "Persuaded. Then where to now? To the kitchen to put groceries, or to hide gifts in your room?" Sakura and I, sitting to the right and left of the door, eavesdropped and, automatically crossing our fingers, hoped that the guys would not come to us and see the undecorated Christmas tree. Neither I nor she dared to get up while Sasuke and Naruto were outside the door and quickly hang up the last decoration, the light bulbs. But they, without saying a word, shuffled into the large bedroom, and we jumped up and began hastily, nervously and laughing, to unravel the garland. We laughed at their self-confidence and failed deduction, and we did not care whether they heard us from the next room or not. When Sasuke entered, we had not yet had time to light the tree and turn off the light, but Naruto, who was standing behind him, having already realized that the Uchiha had been deceived, played along with us and turned off the lamp, and I inserted the plug into the socket. One of the light bulbs quietly, without scaring anyone, burst, and the lush tree remained standing as a dark, branched shadow in front of the windows. What a surprise! I was offended and went to turn on the light, but the switch didn't work. I clicked it for a long time, deciding that something was stuck. "Here's another one," Naruto laughed. "Do you have candles? I'll go check the plugs." "I think we bought it," Sasuke answered, getting worried. "No, you said that you have houses." Sakura began to feel her way around in the closet, barely lit by a street lamp. "Hurrah!" she whispered triumphantly and handed the candles and matches to Naruto, who volunteered. He handed them to me, saying that I would be the floor lamp. Taking advantage of our good friendly relations, I stepped on his foot and went out into the corridor with a lit candle. He followed, laughing, and began to guide me with his voice, because I didn't know where in the Uchiha's apartment the counter was located, which was hidden in the wall behind a small green door. The problem really was the traffic jams flying, and when Naruto put all the levers in place, the light came on in the kitchen, but not the garland, which remained on. We returned and, finding it broken, threw it away. But white pieces of paper are boring to look at. I was indignant. Sakura thoughtfully looked at the Christmas tree decorated with paper white toffees, cranes, ducks, fish and boats, and suggested, "Let's make new ones from colored paper." I threw up my hands, saying that I didn't know how, but she ran out of the kitchen and returned with a stack of bright multicolored sheets. "Look, it's easy," she threw the sheets of paper on the table, sat down and began to cut a square out of the rectangle. In general, folding any figures from paper is called origami. Since you're 1/4 Japanese, you should be able to do it. I smiled at her naivety, but stood nearby, watching her make triangles from a red square, and then more complex shapes. I learned gradually, studying every movement of her hands with my eyes and without touching the paper, and managed to fold only 2 cranes and 3 toffees. But, Sakura reassured me, they are the most difficult to make. The new tree in orange, red and green colors and with blue, lilac, yellow and brown inhabitants looked more festive, more magnificent, and more alive. In the dim lighting it seemed that we had created an object that synthesized all thoughts and feelings and created what had always been lying on the surface, childishness. The tree was an old grandmother, a very prickly and greedy, girthless aunt who hid gifts from us under the skirt of her colorful and light dress. We tried to dissuade her, lay on the floor and carefully stretched out our hands to get the boxes that Sasuke the sneak had helped his grandmother hide by kicking the packages that were in his way. We breathed the wind, which tore through our chests tightly bound with musty but warm air, washed ourselves with cold water, opened the windows, just so as not to lose this feeling. But they quickly got used to it and hid again, because they were freezing and Yasuko could catch a cold because of the cracks under the doors. We poured water on each other and did not get tired. Together we lulled Yasukun to sleep when she woke up, and then returned to the kitchen and fooled around again, not remembering what the last age level had been jumped over. We didn't think about responsibility because no one told us to be quiet and respect others. We threw stale salad and fought for small tomatoes. We fell asleep as happy children, not thinking that tomorrow we would wake up again as unhappy, confused adults. Because no one told us to be quiet and respect others. We threw stale salad and fought for small tomatoes. We fell asleep as happy children, not thinking that tomorrow we would wake up again as unhappy, confused adults. Because no one told us to be quiet and respect others. We threw stale salad and fought for small tomatoes. We fell asleep as happy children, not thinking that tomorrow we would wake up again as unhappy, confused adults. Date: there is no specific date, I can't remember anything exact. The guys left in early 1942, 3 days short of their wedding anniversary. Afterwards, Sakura and I decided not to celebrate any more holidays, but every month the holiday itself came to us by mail. The Uchiha wrote once a month, and the letters were not voluminous and detailed, but after reading them, Sakura never felt lonely and laughed a lot, as if they were an injection of morphine for her, putting her to sleep and abstracting her from the current calendar. Sometimes there were notes from Naruto on the sheets, and Sakura always let me read them. I myself never asked, I understood that this did not concern me. After the departure of the 442nd Infantry Regiment, the dihedral attitude toward Japanese Americans changed. While previously some were respected and praised for their dedication and loyalty, now hatred was so naked that the level of decency did not allow one to speak well or neutrally about the Japanese. They were despised, they were tried to be deprived of their civil rights, they were set up to be sent to prison. But there was only one excuse: those who are loyal to the USA are already in Italy, the rest are parasites and traitors. Therefore, in March 42, on Sasuke's advice, I moved in with Sakura, out of prejudice, as he said. Being responsible not only for my own mouth, I began to go to the store on a schedule and deduct the rest of my salary from all checks. Every Tuesday, when I had a day off from work, I went to buy groceries, household goods and other small things for Yasuko, like chocolate or juice. I came home, and Sakura always took my heavy bag from me at the door. Then we cooked together for the first half of the week. We cooked soup, fried potatoes, and rarely stewed meat and vegetables. They made sure to eat from the stove with spatulas and fed Yasuko porridge with jam. Every Tuesday the newspaper came out in the evening, and when the three of us went for a walk at 9:30, I ran into a nearby kiosk to buy it. We read at night and took turns, not daring to do it out loud. We didn't find what we were looking for in any article, but, every night, gray paper with ink brought us closer to what was happening at the front, not allowing us to lose a real strong connection with what was hidden behind the horizon. We were afraid to forget that there, in a place where the sun, tired of us, runs away to look at another life, another story is being written. In 42, I was appointed to a new position, autonomous from our corps. The initiator was Orochimaru, who called my apartment and offered me a position as an assistant in a new government project. A little time has passed since the funding for the previous project was exhausted and the decision was made to begin creating an atomic bomb that would be more relevant in wartime, and all the people whom the state could trust were brought in at an accelerated pace. Despite everything, I was this person too, although my work was correspondingly insignificant. I was almost forced to check spelling and grammatical errors in reports. Life would be similar to the rhythmic knock of dripping drops on the window visor. If Sasuke's letters were not sometimes delayed, the attacks on Hawaii did not thunder throughout the country. Pessimistic and democratic cynical headlines were not full of pessimistic and democratic cynical headlines on the front pages of newspapers. Ardent patriots were not met on the street, and if Sasuke and Naruto were nearby, a miserable peaceful existence on the verge of fear and oblivion would be practically our usual happy life, if not for this. Date, 4th of August. I spent all the days after testing the world's first atomic warhead at work, checking the latest reports and collecting reports from them for ministers and the president. I didn't see the process itself, but I heard a lot from Orochimaru about a nuclear cloud that looked like a mushroom. He was not stingy in his descriptions of what promised to end the war, but in reality was capable of killing millions of people. He rejoiced all day and was saddened by the thought that he would never again see such destructive power. The complex on the territory of which the tests were carried out was built in the south of the country back in 1943, but I only worked in it for the last month. Sakura and the matured Yasukun lived for several days without me and always happily sent me to work. After all, they thought, when Japan surrenders, Naruto's dad and uncle will return. I didn't know if it was true, and that made me afraid to believe it, until I met Naruto in our building. He, talking with one of the bosses, walked towards me and did not notice until the boss himself, stopping me, invited him to read the reports that were in the office where I worked and where I was going. "Sergeant, do you understand everything?" Uzumaki nodded absently at him, looking at me and laughing quietly. "Then I trust you to Karin." "You meant to say, Karin," Naruto corrected. "Her name is Karin." The old man, good-natured by nature and in no hurry, was surprised at our acquaintance and apologized to me. "I thought you had an American name," he smiled and, saying goodbye, walked further along the corridor. "Are you a pilot?" I asked immediately when we were alone. "Actually, no, but that's how they treat me. I'm a replacement," he smiled. "In the meantime, I'm running errands for cool guy Rogers, who will be dropping your bomb, and paying off my debts." "Where is he?" "At home with my wife." "Why isn't Sasuke at home?" I asked, remembering Sakura and Yasuko and not knowing what else I could handle after 3.5 years. Naruto stopped smiling and confidently, agreeing with his friend's idea, answered. "In Japan, the armed forces are planning to build military settlements for reliable control, and Sasuke is going to return to his homeland as an American soldier. Otherwise, the Japanese themselves will not let him in. Therefore, for now he is collecting papers all over the country." I didn't ask why he was doing this, for fear of not understanding, and only carefully asked. "And you?" "There is no point in me going back. He's going because of his parents." His steps became wider, and I had to move my feet faster. "By the way, how did you live here?" In the letters, in my opinion, both sides wrote only good things, not a drop of truth. He smiled sadly. I smiled the same way, saying that we still wrote the truth, that we had nothing to lie about. "I hope that this really was so," he repeated while I was talking about the measured dripping of the former, already yesterday's life. We reached the office approximately halfway through my boring narrative, devoid of changing intonations and aspirations. Naruto asked to continue, and I said that his business was more important. The departure date was the next day. He spent a long time looking for the folder he needed, and having found a couple, he wanted to pick up the papers, but resigned himself to the fact that the only copies of documents of national importance were not brought to the doorstep at an affordable price. He flipped through them but found nothing. He only asked me who was responsible for the flight. Walk around the top, I don't know. He seems to be a general, but he is too clueless and knows nothing except coordinates. And then God forbid, I said, playing unshakable calm, in a stuttering, creaking voice. To play it believable, I started looking around and rummaging through papers, as if I was looking for something specific. Where to go up? On the 4th floor, there is a platform and, probably, everyone who can help you. Okay, he replaced the folders that he had previously held in his hands. Goodbye then. I think I'll be here longer than you today. Moreover, today is Friday and you have to go to Yasuko and Sakura. He waved his hand, smiling, and left. Date, 9th of August. I was at work, but, like everyone else, I was wandering aimlessly around the floors. The second bombing was planned on the 9th, and no one cared about the reports, the latest experiments and the organization of flights. Both Baby and Fat Man were released to the military forces, and our complex did not care about anything else. It was raining outside the walls. I drank cups of coffee in the dining room, drops drummed on the windows. I was practically lying on the table, without thoughts, without ideas, without feelings and body movements. I wanted to go to Sakura, but no one was waiting for me there. Sasuke had recently returned and I was afraid of being out of place. As sometimes the drizzle turned into downpour, I pestered my superiors, asking when the pilots would return. Even then, she was consciously waiting for Naruto, blaming invincible boredom for her misfortunes. At the end of the working day, the clerical team began to play cards, but without the excitement of losing everything, it turned out that it was difficult for adults to do this. I fell asleep on the sofa in the secretary's reception area in the evening. I dreamed of the sun slowly rolling over the horizon, broken by a bright yellow cloud that looked like a mushroom. Moving away from him, gray smoke rapidly spread across the ground, driven by a hot, uncontrollable blast wave. Pieces of land took off and disappeared, trees surrounding a small uninhabited canyon burned to the ground, flying birds, falling short of the ground, turned into ash, and it scattered in the air, carried away by the wind, and got into the eyes. With monotonous, growing blows, I could hear the arrogant violence of a man approaching me, devouring me in a moment. I woke up abruptly, frightened by an inaccurate, blurry short dream. Nearby, in a chair opposite, Naruto, who seemed to have recently returned from the islands, was sleeping. Desperate fear did not pass, although everything around was calm, the rain was still drumming on the windows, there was no usual commotion, but I abruptly got up from the sofa and, believing that everything would forgive me now, ran up to Naruto to wake him up. Naruto, I whispered and lightly shook his shoulder. How long have you arrived? She asked, although he had not woken up yet. I only saw his new face when he opened his eyes and answered. There was no longer that light southern tan, the skin became pale, as if colorless, bruises and wrinkles formed under the eyes. And only the blue eyes remained blue, but they looked differently, aloof, tired, without a smile. An hour ago, he answered casually, yawning and settling more comfortably in his chair. It seemed to me that these were just attempts to portray his natural state of optimist. Then he said that he piloted the plane with the kid. He began to talk about the bombing of Hiroshima. He no longer lied with a single action, not a single tremor of his voice. He suddenly began to speak desperately, and my fear, generated in a dream, answered him along with the rain, intensifying. Drip 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 drip. Rogers fell ill on the continent, they took me as prepared, Naruto began. So I flew away like some kind of terrorist, firmly believing that he was right. And the Japanese practically capitulated. He spoke louder, then quieter. Germany is no more, there is nothing for their camp to hold on to, the main force has been suppressed by the Soviets. And we use an atomic bomb. You know, Hiroshima is located south of Tokyo, but on the way back I took an unsuccessful course and made a detour. The ground there is black, we burned everything out. And then they dropped it. Her. I didn't even know what I was carrying on board. What a. Could you create this? What devil? This cloud was rushing upward so quickly. I was probably saved by chance. He fell silent and looked inquisitively into my eyes. Did you know that all the release points were civilians? I shook my head and, because of my disobedient voice and dry throat, said in a confused whisper. This information is classified, it does not concern our complex. Why didn't they say this? He cried. Why didn't I know this? Leaning on his knees, Naruto covered his face with his hands. I sat down opposite him and hugged his head, not knowing what to do, but feeling that I was doing something natural and right. I didn't want to calm him down, I didn't want to help him, because it was impossible, but I wanted to share his despair, to draw a little for myself from the abyss into which he had fallen. Fear fueled me from within, and therefore it seemed to me that I, too, could give him something, that I could drown with him, that I had every right to do so. We sat in silence for about 5 minutes, without changing body positions, practically without moving. I felt how I was lulled by the rain outside the window, the fresh cold air, the wind that made the whole forest rustle. It was calm to feel fear and wrap yourself in it, trying to escape from real melancholy and boredom. But that frenzy of perception, that play of the subconscious over the whole body was a deception, unable to change my life, and Naruto's despair changed him from the inside. It destroyed all established principles, tore off hopes in pieces and left bleeding wounds of unfulfilled dreams. It changed a person, gave birth to a new one, and it was scary to be around. He removed my hands from his neck, squeezed them as if he didn't want me to remove them, and then let go. He would have left immediately if I hadn't grabbed his wrist tightly, and as if my movement was a question, he answered. Be right back. But when he returned, I was sleeping, buried in the sofa cushion, and for the first time in the last summer, my cheeks were streaked with invisible lines of tears. Then I realized all the wretchedness of my life, all the meaninglessness of its continuation and the extreme degree of indifference that it had brought up in me. I woke up, and Naruto, sitting at my feet, offered to fly as volunteers to Hiroshima with the American Red Cross. Date, 10th of August. It's hard to forget that sunset. Like the sun, I was saying goodbye to American soil. Unconsciously, I smiled at the horizon and reproached it for the fact that it could not explode again and take away one single life. My meaningless, confusing life. I loved the summer sunset for the long shadows and warm paths of light cast by the sun. It didn't bake, but gently, like a blanket, warmed the exposed skin. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine that very explosion that tore apart history and interrupted so many lives. But there was no blast wave, and the air stood without wavering. I sat on a bench opposite a cliff in a country park and waited for Sakura and Yasuko. Soon Yasuko's bicycle creaked, and Sakura ran up to me, excited and out of breath. But I was waiting for them, and if they had arrived half an hour later, would have just as happily looked at their happy faces. Sakura sat down next to me and asked how long I had been waiting for them. Who cares? I'm not in a hurry. So my conscience is clear, she smiled, answering, but stopped, remembering our conversation. So you're flying away? I don't know, I said tiredly, hiding my face with my palms and leaning back on the bench. For some reason, it seemed to me that my decision could concern only 2 people on the entire destroyed planet. In the end, soon the Americans will build bases and you will fly away too. What should I do here alone? I am a Gemini according to the horoscope, I am destined to be with those to whom I become attached. Except that it's you, I smiled, although I didn't change either my posture or the position of my hands. Sakura took my words like an adult and did not answer. She huddled next to him a little, and then said, "Are you flying with Naruto?" "It seems that I'm flying to find a new me," I said pathetically, but, as it seemed to me, honestly and correctly, looking into Sakura's eyes. But suddenly, to my right, Yasuko, throwing her bicycle, threw her body onto the bench and laughed. Arr! I growled gutturally and laid her on my shoulder blades. She began to fight off my tickling, and then more seriously than her mother could, she said, "Why are you flying away from us? Is it really more interesting with Uncle Naruto than with me?" I didn't know how to answer her, and I lied like I would lie to any child. "Of course not." And continued to tickle her until she rolled over from the bench onto the ground and rushed back to riding her bike. "You know, if I don't fly with Naruto," I turned to Sakura, "I'll probably get lost here again." This is where the story ends.